Okay, so I'm back without Sean. We actually went hiking yesterday, today's the next day. We ended up just eating dinner and then watching, I think we watched a movie. We watched Monster Squad from the 80s, so it was a lot of fun. So I wanted to record still because I didn't go over the renting or buying portion of the video that I wanted to talk about. So with our tiny house, we kind of had typically only two options. So you either rent a space to place your tiny house. It could be an RV park. They typically accept tiny houses. There's tiny house communities, but since tiny houses are not necessarily fully legal yet, it's kind of hard to get a real tiny house community set up in any city. So it usually takes a lot of planning with like the city does all of those types of approvals. So there are some, I know of some in BC, one in, forgot where that city, super up north, I don't remember. And that's actually run by the same people that are building our tiny house. So that was kind of one of our options. We knew of the tiny house community, so we knew for sure that we could park our tiny house there. But it was in an area that we didn't want to live in. It was super north, so it was going to be way colder than what we were experiencing in Toronto. So that's kind of the opposite of what we were looking for. But at least we had that option if we didn't find anything before that point. So that was kind of our plan B. Originally, when we first decided that we wanted to live in a tiny house, we were looking at purchasing land. And so I even went to our bank and I applied for basically a mortgage. It was taking a while because I didn't have any Canadian credit. I wasn't building any since we got there, so it kind of took a while for them to approve me. That was dragging on way too long and I just really wanted to quit my job. So it was like, okay, maybe we shouldn't wait for this mortgage to be approved. And even still, like once it is approved, we still need to find land that we like. And not only that, but it takes time to, you know, put down an offer and then for it to go through escrow. And then I wanted to be done with my job before that point. So we started looking into renting land. We actually got a pretty good response on finding land. Like we always thought the opposite, that there was always like more people with tiny houses that were looking for land to park their tiny house on, opposed to like people that are looking for tiny house renters. So it was actually in our favor. We found 3 different places that we could park our tiny house. So at the time we were super stressed, so we were seeing basically a couples therapist, and she was telling us, you know, it's not a good idea to just kind of go without seeing it first, because she was very into like being connected with yourself and understanding like what feels right to you. So she was telling us not to purchase land. She wanted us to like probably explore and like travel around like longer than we did. So when we were looking to buy land, so some of the criteria that we were looking for, we didn't actually want to initially be off the grid. And so what we wanted was a water hookup to a well. And then we were also thinking about potentially having a place that had septic so we can just hook up to it. So it was also hard to find land that had all those things. Something that we also wanted was a utility hookup. So there's somewhere that had like cable available. We didn't necessarily like want the cable, but we wanted the internet. We knew that was going to be difficult to get. Having our own small businesses, internet is something that's really important, especially if we want to be uploading videos, or we, you know, need to be working on our websites or whatever. That's a really important thing. So we were looking at places that had, or looking at land that had those things. The septic wasn't really that important to us because we knew we could do composting toilets and things like that, like gray water runoff. So we weren't too worried about that. The main thing that we were looking for was a well. Like water is probably like the most important thing that we needed as a resource. Yeah, the internet thing we'll figure it out. Because there's probably some plans that we could get that are like satellite or whatever, even just like cell phone service, and get like one of those mobile MiFis. We still need to figure that part out, so we'll get to that once we get closer to that part. But those are some things to consider, especially with renting land as well. But unfortunately, because there wasn't that many options for land, we couldn't be too picky about, you know, the resources that they had. All the places that we looked at, I think they were all off-grid locations. That's kind of the downside, is when you're renting land, typically you're just renting like a small portion of someone's large acreage land. And usually they don't have like those types of hookups. So because of that, we had to go with an off-grid system. Basically, so we just kind of checked out all the land options as well as the cities that we're thinking about living in. And I'm so glad we did, because our therapist was right. She was telling us that we have to go to these cities, you know, talk to the people that live there, you know, get their take on, you know, the good and the bad of living in that area, as well as just feeling it for ourselves and seeing it for ourselves and experiencing it, because you can't get that from reading about a city online. So glad we got to experience that life, and we were on the road for 2 weeks and we had so much fun. So some resources, some places that we looked for land to rent was through Kijiji, which is like Canada's version of Craigslist. They also have Craigslist. So we checked Kijiji, we checked Craigslist, and the one that worked the best that we actually found our land through was a Facebook group. So it was a tiny house, it was BC tiny houses or something like that, where Sean had posted in there that he was looking for land, and that's how we found our landowners. Something else, clearing off the space for that land, or to put the tiny house on, the land needs to be prepped. I'll also go into that once we get to that. Our landowners had already cleared out a spot for us to park our tiny house on, so all we need to do is just prep that space that they cleared for us. It's also a dirt road that they like kind of made for us, so we're considering getting gravel for that as well, just because we're not really sure how it's going to be in the winter time when it's raining a lot, and we don't want to get stuck. So that's something to consider. We're not really sure yet. We're probably going to wait until we get there to see what it's like, and that could be like a project that we work on once we get out there. Yeah, I think I covered everything. So yeah, so my next video will either be tiny house update, so I'll show you some photos, some progress photos of our tiny house and what it's gonna look like. I might show you our blueprint, the design of it, and then I also want to do a video about building the tiny house. So stay tuned for that. See you guys next time.